He was one of the greatest kings of Jerusalem. He was a great example of how the Crusaders were originally meant to be. Here is a life of King Baldwin IV of Jerusalem. Baldwin was born in Jerusalem in 1161 to King Amalric I and Queen Agnes of Courtenay. He had a sister named Sibylla. The kingdom of Jerusalem was ruled by Franks, even though it was surrounded by Arab Muslim countries. His father wanted to ensure that Baldwin received a good education, so the 9-year-old prince was sent to live with William of Tyre, a sophisticated and well-traveled cleric. William noticed that, unlike other children in the playground, Baldwin did not cry when pinched by his friends. After a while, it became apparent to the tutor that Baldwin could not feel pain in his right arm. The king hired Arabs to treat Baldwin and to teach him horse riding, an essential skill for a Frankish nobleman. Having sensation in only one hand, Baldwin needed to learn how to control the horse using solely his knees. He mastered riding despite the handicap. Arab physicians suspected that he had leprosy, but there were no visible symptoms yet, and they hesitated to diagnose because of the stigma the boy would face. Had the diagnosis been made when he was a child, Baldwin might have never become the king. As an adolescent, Baldwin was precocious, determined, and optimistic in the face of his illness. He took after his father in good looks, body shape, and manner of walking and expressing himself. He enjoyed listening to stories and history lessons. His tutor, William, remarked on Baldwin's excellent memory, stating that he forgot neither kindness nor slights done to him by others. On 11th of July, 1174, King Amalric died from dysentery, leaving an underage heir, as he had feared might happen. Upon his death, the High Court convened to discuss the succession. Though Baldwin had not yet been diagnosed, the High Court was aware of the royal physician's suspicions that Baldwin had contracted leprosy. There was no alternative. Baldwin was the king's only son. From his second marriage, Amalric had 2 daughters, of which only Isabella survived infancy. Female succession was expressly allowed, but Isabella was only 2 years old. The male candidates, Amalric's cousins Prince Bohemond III of Antioch and Count Raymond III of Tripoli, were politically unsuitable. Bohemond was bound to distant Antioch, and Raymond was virtually a stranger to the barons after 9 years spent in Muslim captivity. After 3 days of deliberation, Baldwin IV was chosen. The young king's coronation by the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem took place immediately in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Medieval rulers were normally crowned on Sundays, but in Baldwin's case, 15th of July 1174 was chosen instead, as it was the 75th anniversary of the First Crusade's seizure of Jerusalem. Until he reached the age of majority, which was 15 in the Kingdom of Jerusalem, Baldwin needed a regent to rule in his name. Count Raymond III of Tripoli arrived in Jerusalem and succeeded in claiming regency as the king's closest kinsman. During the regency, it became clear that Baldwin was indeed affected by leprosy. It is not clear from whom he caught it, but it must have been someone with whom he spent a lot of time and who did not exhibit easily visible symptoms. His condition worsened rapidly. Most severely affected were his limbs and face, which made his subjects uneasy when they approached him. As soon as Baldwin took over the government, he began planning a full-scale attack on Egypt with his advisors. The king took advantage of Saladin's campaign in Aleppo to lead a raid around Damascus. This was his first experience in war. Despite having use of only one hand, he refused to delegate his military duties and took part in fighting. He and his advisors then decided to intervene in Saladin's war against the Order of Assassins. On 1st of August, Baldwin and Raymond led the armies of Jerusalem and Tripoli in a raid of the Bekaa Valley, where they defeated the garrison of Damascus, forcing Saladin to abandon his campaign. In order to carry out his attack on Egypt, Baldwin needed naval support. He sent an embassy to Emperor Manuel in Constantinople in the winter of 1176. Manuel agreed to take part in the invasion in return for the establishment of Byzantine protectorate over the kingdom and restoration of the Orthodox Patriarch in Jerusalem. The Byzantines sent a war fleet in preparation of the invasion of Egypt, but to Baldwin's regret, they withdrew because of the uncooperativeness of Philip I of Flanders, Bohemond of Antioch, and Raymond of Tripoli. Saladin's power remained unchecked, and the Byzantine alliance collapsed. Philip left the Kingdom of Jerusalem with his troops in late October 1177 to help Raymond of Tripoli attack the Muslim-held city of Hama. With the Frankish army in northern Syria, Saladin seized the opportunity to invade Baldwin's kingdom on 18th November. Saladin reached Ascalon on 22nd November, and Baldwin led the troops out to meet him. Seeing how drastically outnumbered he was, the king retreated into the city. Saladin too saw the strength in his numbers and confidently proceeded towards Jerusalem. Baldwin managed to contact the Templars and ordered them to to abandon Gaza and join him. Contrary to the Sultan's expectation, Baldwin and Reynald, who was one of the noblemen, rode out of Ascalon, joined up with the Templars, and attacked his dispersed army at Montgazard. Saladin, who barely survived, suffered a crushing defeat. Not having enough men to launch an offensive on the retreating Muslims, Baldwin decided to fortify the Damascene frontier. In the winter of 1177, Baldwin's widowed sister, Sibylla, gave birth to a son, Baldwin, named after the king. A year of official mourning for the child's father concluded in June 1178, and it became appropriate to seek another husband for her. There were many options. Baldwin of Ibelins was a known noble, but Sibylla didn't want him. In order to avoid offending the Ibelins, King Baldwin had allowed Balian of Ibelin to marry his stepmother, Queen Maria, in late 1177. In July 1178, Baldwin began associating Sibylla with him in some public acts, thereby acknowledging her as next in line to the throne. During the Holy Week in 1180, the Prince of Antioch and the Count of Tripoli marched with their armies to Jerusalem. It is most likely that their intention was to force the king to have Sibylla marry Baldwin of Ibelin and to then abdicate. The king had never approved of Baldwin's ambition to marry his sister, and though he did wish to abdicate, he was not keen on having terms forced on him. The king acted decisively before his kinsman's armies reached Jerusalem. He arranged for Sibylla to marry a French knight, Guy of Lusignan. Baldwin had hoped to abdicate, but was prevented by a deep rift within his court. The historian Stephen Runciman speaks of a division already at the beginning of Baldwin's reign between the cautious, diplomatic native barons on one side and the aggressive, militantly Christian newcomers from Western Europe and Templars on the other. This view is rejected by modern authors, such as Bernard Hamilton and Peter Edberry. Hamilton claims that the factions arose only after Sibylla's marriage to Guy and centered on the king's paternal and maternal relatives, of whom the king supported the maternal. In light of these problems, Baldwin proposed a 2-year truce with Saladin, who was glad to accept in order to campaign freely in northern Syria. Baldwin sent his uncle and chief minister, Jocelyn, to assure the Byzantine court that Jerusalem still needed their protection. During Jocelyn's absence, from mid-1180 to mid-1181, the full burden of government fell on the shoulders of the king, whose health was deteriorating. To secure Guy's position and prevent the emergence of an alternative claimant, Baldwin had his 8-year-old half-sister Isabella engaged to the teenaged Lord of Turan, Humphrey IV, in October 1180. Isabella was then sent to live at Carrack Castle with the Humphrey's mother. By the terms of the marriage contract, Humphrey ceded Turan to Baldwin, who thus prevented the union of two great fiefs under one vassal and strengthened his position against the Count of Tripoli. Baldwin made use of the truce with Saladin to strengthen the position of his maternal kin, granting territories to his maternal relatives, while associating Guy and Sibylla with him in public acts. He remained unreconciled with Raymond and forbade him to enter the kingdom in early 1182, owing to suspicions of a conspiracy. Baldwin intended to charge Raymond with treason and deprive him of the Principality of Galilee, a fief of Jerusalem, but the law prevented him from doing it. Baldwin's truce with Saladin was due to expire in May 1182, but was broken in mid-1181 by Reynald, who seized a merchant caravan on its way from Egypt to Damascus. Reynald ignored the king's request to make restitution to Saladin. The king, who consistently acted against Saladin's attempts to expand into northern Syria, decided to oppose him. The recent anti-Catholic coup in Constantinople gave Saladin confidence to attack the Kingdom of Jerusalem. In July, Baldwin marched to relieve the Muslim siege of Bethsan, and his outnumbered army won the Battle of Leper. The defeated Sultan besieged Beirut, while another army from Egypt attacked the south of the kingdom. Baldwin knew that he was being provoked into dividing his forces. Deciding that Beirut was of a greater strategic importance, he ignored the southern attack and moved with his troops to Tyre. From there, he procured assistance from the Italian maritime republics in lifting Saladin's naval blockade of Beirut. Saladin abandoned the siege, but declined to make a truce, worrying Baldwin and his advisors. He proceeded north to fight the Zengids, while Baldwin led an attack on Saladin's Damascene territory before finally laying siege and capturing Cave de Suez. In the winter of 1183, after agreeing on a strategy with his council, Baldwin attacked Damascus again. Baldwin could not walk unsupported or use his hands from 1183. Because of an inability to blink, he became blind. Nevertheless, he had to summon his troops in response to Saladin's march south, following the Egyptian conquest of Aleppo in June. The king then developed a life-threatening fever. He was attended by his mother and the new patriarch, Heraclius, near the city of Nazareth. Baldwin entrusted the government to his brother-in-law, Guy, who was next in line to succeed him. Guy's appointment to regency was meant to be permanent. Baldwin retained only the royal title and authority over the city of Jerusalem, but he had Guy swear that while he is alive, he would not make himself the king. Fearing discontent among his barons, Baldwin had failed to give Guy any experience in military leadership prior to making him regent. The great lords of the kingdom, the independent rulers of Antioch and Tripoli, and the grand masters of the military refused to cooperate with Guy. Baldwin recovered unexpectedly and returned to Jerusalem. Having found that coastal climate suited his health, Baldwin offered Jerusalem to Guy in exchange for Tyre. Guy refused, possibly because Tyre was more lucrative, leaving Baldwin gravely insulted. The wedding of Baldwin's half-sister Isabella and Humphrey IV of Toron was celebrated in Carrack Castle in late 1183. Saladin attacked during the festivities and laid siege to the castle, hoping to capture the king's half-sister and her husband. When the news of a siege reached the retired king, he immediately dismissed Guy from regency and resumed power, as the defense of such a vital fortress and his half-sister within it could not be entrusted to the man who had proven unable to command the troops. The proposal of the king's mother that Sibilla's 5-year-old son, Baldwin, be made co-king was accepted, and the boy was crowned on the 20th of November. In late November, Baldwin ordered the lighting of a beacon on the Tower of David in order to hearten the defenders of the intensely bombarded Carrack. Baldwin accompanied his troops again, but having become blind and immobile, this time he went in a litter slung between 2 horses. His presence was essential to unite the discordant barons. Warned by his scouts about the king's approach and concerned about having left Egypt unguarded, Saladin abandoned the siege on the 4th of December. Baldwin entered Carrack triumphantly. The question of regency for his nephew troubled Baldwin. The only way to ensure that Guy could not claim it was to have his marriage to Sibylla annulled. Baldwin discussed this with the patriarch Heraclius. The king had intended to claim that he had forced his sister to marry Guy, and that the marriage was unlawful because of that. Sibylla's loyalty to Guy thwarted his plans, as the couple refused to appear at court. In the early 1184, Baldwin ordered Guy to attend him as vassal in Jerusalem. Guy declined, citing poor health, and this was repeated several times. Baldwin then had himself carried to Ascalon in the company of the high court. Guy refused to let him into the city. In June, Saladin was once again besieging Carrack. Again, Saladin abandoned the siege when the litter-bound king approached with his army. Once in Carrack, Baldwin ordered and financed the reparations of the damaged castle. He soon developed a fever. When he returned to Jerusalem, Baldwin gave the regency on Raymond of Tripoli, the man whom he had never trusted, but to whom he could find no better alternative. At the time, he expected to survive the illness, having done so twice before, but within weeks it became apparent that it would be his last. On his deathbed, he summoned the high court to appoint a permanent regent for his nephew Baldwin V, and Raymond was chosen. The dying king then ordered that his nephew be honored as king and Raymond as regent, followed by a solemn crowning ceremony at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Baldwin IV died in March in 1185. He was only 24 at the time. He was buried in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, close to his father, King Amalric. The young Baldwin V died the next year. Sibylla, who succeeded her son, made Guy king. Baldwin IV's kingdom was destroyed by Saladin following his decisive victory over Guy at the Horns of Hattin in 1187. Sibylla and her daughters died in 1190, leaving Isabella as the heir to the defeated kingdom. What do you think about King Baldwin IV? For more videos like this, make sure to leave a like and to subscribe to the channel. If you want to support me more, you can donate to me on Patreon. There is a link in the channel description. See you next week.